first time I ever heard the idea that God actually talks to you, wants to guide you. I always thought God informed you with his Bible, which he does. But as far as God talking to you, I always thought that was kind of crazy until something pretty traumatic happened to me when I was a youth minister back in Snellville, Georgia. I don't know when it was, maybe 2001, whatever it was, a long time ago now. And I was on my way to a youth lock-in retreat. I was a youth minister at a pretty big Methodist church, and I was all stressed out, driving around in my Jeep Cherokee and trying to get everything together for the big youth event. We're going to meet with two other churches at the YMCA and do a lock-in. And lock-ins are never a good idea. I don't care who you are, staying up all night with a bunch of teenagers, dumbest idea in the world. But we were going to do it, we were dumb. So we were going to do this lock-in, and I was driving down the road, down Highway 78 in Snellville, Georgia, and I was listening to Charles Stanley. He's an Atlanta preacher on the radio, and he was talking about, do you want to hear God's voice? Do you want to hear God talk to you directly? I remember saying kind of jokingly and seriously, yeah, I want to hear God's voice. I want to hear God talk to me. And he says, when God talks to you, this is like on the radio, wasn't in my car with me. He says, you have to hear God's voice and then you have to obey. So I thought, no big deal, that sounds cool. Went on to the youth event, and we had like 300 kids there, 300 teenagers. It was a big event. It had an indoor pool. It had like racquetball courts, basketball courts, and volleyball courts. So we had several hundred teenagers there and 3 other churches. So all the youth adults, young, whatever, youth leaders, our job was kind of wander around and make sure everybody's okay. So I had no intentions of going swimming whatsoever. Didn't even really bring a bathing suit. I was in the volleyball court area, and I remember hearing God very distinctly in my heart saying, go to the pool. It was very startling. It wasn't an audible voice, but it was a very strong sense in my heart, go to the pool. So I went to the pool kind of jokingly. And I went to the pool area, and of course there was a lot of kids in there swimming, right? They're all in the shallow end, the deep end, just around the diving board having a good time. And then all of a sudden I heard that same voice again in my heart saying, go to the shallow end. So I didn't know what that meant. So I went to the shallow end, and I saw this kid named Justin. Now Justin was 6'8", big, tall guy. And he was like one of those warrior kind of guys. He was always training for something, those kind of types like gung-ho, Mr. Navy SEAL and training, that kind of thing. He was a senior in high school, great guy. And I look over there in the shallow end, and Justin has a snorkel on, and he's laying down in 3 foot of water on the bottom, just kind of floating there. So I thought to myself, he's joking with me, So I jump in the pool, with a few teenagers around me, and I started going to kick him underwater just to mess with him. And when I kick him, he turns over and he's blue, and I realize he's drowned. So immediately I pulled him out of the pool. We started CPR. It was kind of a blur. The lifeguard was no help at all. I remember her kept screaming, he's dead, oh my gosh, and we had to get her out of there. And someone's saying, call 911, and I'm trying my best to remember how to do CPR. I've never done it in my life. And this big, tall guy trying to breathe in his mouth, pump his chest. It took a lot of movement for my height to go from his mouth to his chest and keep everything going. And I just remember all this water coming up out of his lungs and them feeling for a pulse, and there was no pulse. And I remember we stayed there until the EMTs got there finally. And they got a very weak pulse, and they pulled me inside, and they said, you did all you could do. So I was in shock and disbelief. This 18-year-old kid had drowned in a pool under my watch. That's how I felt. And I don't know what to do, except we all went to the hospital. The parents met us there. And I remember sitting in the waiting room, and the parents were just crying, of course, in shock. And they were talking to me. They said, Josh, we don't want our son gone too. They had lost their daughter several years earlier. So this was their last living child. And my heart was just breaking for them. I couldn't understand what they were going through, and I felt all this burden on me and this kind of thing, and didn't have any words, And I remember this one lady pulling me aside, and she goes, you know what? God's not done here yet. Let's go hear what he has to say. So here we are again. Somebody else saying, let's hear from God. And I go into this chapel with her. It was another youth minister lady and several other people. We all went in there, and they started singing songs to God. They were singing praises to him, worshiping him, thinking how good he was. I remember closing my eyes and And I was praying, and all of a sudden I could see this ribbon, like a red line going through my mind. And every time I'd get close to snapping, I'd pray that it wouldn't, and it'd get thick again. I don't know what I was seeing. But I remember hearing God again saying, speak life. Don't speak death. So immediately we started speaking life. And what that meant was, God, thank you for Justin's life. Thank you for saving his life. You know, God, we know that you're with him. And, you know, you're praying and you're singing praises, and it looks like there's no hope. And I remember going back into the waiting room, and the code blue had happened, and Justin had flatlined for the third time. And the doctor came out there, and they revived him, and he told me, he says, you did the best you could do. You know, if you wouldn't have pulled him out of the pool, he wouldn't have a chance right now. And they said if he does live, he'll be a vegetable, because his brain had really swollen, and both of his lungs had collapsed from all the water. So it didn't look good, and he was hooked up to ventilators, and no response, had a pulse, that kind of thing. So I remember several days later, all the youth, we were praying for him. And God said, I'm not done with him yet. And while we were praying over Justin in the church, the senior pastor and his parents were holding hands, because they thought they were going to have to pull the plug on Justin. They were holding hands over him and praying one more time for Justin, one more time. And God had told us, I'm not done with Justin. And as they were praying this and getting ready to decide if they're going to keep him on life support, Justin wakes up with a breathing tube, and he mouths the words, what happened? Immediately they started everything. Long story short, he went on to join the military, I believe. His brain is fully fine. He went on to the University of Georgia with a full scholarship. He's alive and well. God totally healed him. And that is the first time that I ever experienced the power of hearing God's voice, obeying what he says, and then watching the miracles. And my life has been changed ever since 2001. So does God still speak to us? Yes. You just got to be willing to listen. So let's listen, and let's believe him, obey, and then let's watch the miracles. God bless you all. From the branch, this is Josh Lauderbaugh.